Welcome, viewers and listeners, to another edition of CHP Talks. I'm here with a repeat guest and a good friend, Andrew DeBartolo. Andrew, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Rod. It's always good to chat with you.
Yeah. For those who don't know, Andrew is the Director of Operations for Liberty Coalition Canada, where his aim is to provide Canadians with a distinctly Christian and conservative worldview to make sense of social, political, and theological issues. He has also had experience serving in pastoral ministry for 15 years. He and his wife, Catherine, have been married since 2009, and together they have 5 children. And it's just great to have you back with us today. And it was good to see you in Windsor there a few months ago. And I
Mhm.
look forward to seeing you again this year because you have some things going. First of all, tell the folks a little bit about Liberty Coalition, and then we'll talk about the politics in the pulpit conferences that you have coming up.
Yeah, so our mission at Liberty Coalition Canada is to establish Christ's justice and righteousness and to defend those who stand. So there are really three arms of LCC. The first arm is our legal aid arm. And so we represent Canadians who've been discriminated against because of religious and conscience beliefs, whether it's the belief that God has created only two genders, whether it's the belief that I shouldn't have to cover my face with a mask to continue in my practice as a chiropractor, or whether it's the belief that I don't want to take an experimental injection, given the contents of said injection, in order to serve as a nurse in the hospital. Those are just three examples of the kind of people we're defending. That's one arm. The other arm of what we do is our media and analysis. And so we have several podcasts, and on those shows, whether it's long form interviews, news analysis, worldview discussion, we try to understand what's happening in the world, but specifically in Canada, most of our content, we're trying to examine it from a distinctly Christian world and life view lens. Then the third part of our kind of work related to the conference you mentioned would be our advocacy work. And so this is our social activism, our political engagement. This is helping Christians to engage kind of in politics, in activism, in protest, in the culture, in various ways. So one of the things we've done historically is we've had our Christians That Care initiative. Rod, you were one of the speakers at this event, where people who are running municipal elections, we help give them kind of high level worldview training, but also very practically how to run a campaign, how to door knock, how to get materials printed out. So those are the three arms of LCC: our legal aid, our analysis shows, and our advocacy work.
So I think one of the people, Andrew, that you defended and worked with was Josh Alexander, that high school brave young man who took on his school board, and you've worked
Mhm.
with him closely. Where's that case at right now?
So essentially, we are still going back and forth with the school. The long and the short of it is they did a few things. The first thing they did was they suspended him, and we've been appealing that suspension. And the other thing that they did is they excluded him from class in school. And so we have been filing with the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal to say that's discrimination because of his particular beliefs that they've excluded him from school. So we haven't seen any actual courtroom yet. There hasn't been any trial that's begun. It's still a lot of back and forth with the school, a lot of filings with the court. And so kind of where it stands right now is one of the things they wanted to do is they wanted to prevent him from appealing the suspension on his own because he was under 18. They wanted to have his parents appeal the suspension, but not out of principle. It's because they wanted to force his parents to come out in strong public support, maybe putting their jobs at risk. And so we said, no, he's of sound mind. He's 17. He can appeal his own suspension. So we won that kind of mini battle there. They've also tried to suppress certain information and certain bits of testimony. So yeah, right now it's back and forth with the school board and with their lawyers. trying to come to some sort of agreement outside of this, namely let him back to school. He's still not allowed at his school. And that's kind of where we're at. So it may end up being in a courtroom at some point if we can't come to some sort of reasonable agreement. But that's where we're at.
Probably most of our listeners are well aware of Josh Alexander and what took place there. But for anyone who may have tuned in late on that story, this young man stood up for the girls in his school and said that they deserved privacy in their washrooms and not to have biological males entering the washroom. And that, of course, in today's society, that is strangely enough, that's a topic of debate. So anyway, he took it on in defense of his fellow classmates, and he's been paying the price, but he's also been, his voice has become a powerful voice in our nation. I think he's going to be a speaker at our convention this summer in Hamilton. So,
yeah, the plan is actually that I'll be interviewing him on stage. It'll be a live interview, and him and I will have that discussion together in Ancaster.
Great. So that's, of course, put a little plug in here for our convention for our members, August 12th to 15 in Ancaster, Ontario at Redeemer University. And so that's going to be a good event for us. Now, one of the things we wanted to talk about today for sure, you have 3 events coming up: Politics in the Pulpit Conference, and it's the subtitle, The Local Church's Responsibility in Political Engagement. And that is right up our alley. We certainly believe that Christians and church leaders particularly should be expressing themselves on these important matters that are affecting our country. And of course, now with Bill 63 and other terrible things that the government, the Trudeau government, is trying to impose on Canadians, they want to make sure that we don't talk about the things that are concerning to us. They want to make sure that only government bureaucrats and politicians and appointed judges and appointed senators can come out with comment, or the media that are in line with them. So we can talk about maybe Bill 63 a little bit after, but tell us about the Politics in the Pulpit conferences that are coming up.
So it's essentially one conference in 3 locations, and we wanted to have it in multiple locations across the country to give people ample opportunity, regardless of where they live, to attend. And so it'll essentially be the same speakers, except at each location you'll have the local church pastor speaking. I'll be speaking as well, and David Haskell, who's a professor at Wilfrid Laurier, who just recently had a study of his published with the National Post regarding DEI initiatives and how they lead to more, not less, racism and bigotry and discrimination. So David's a good brother. He's a solid guy. Kind of the genesis of this conference was, how can we equip, train, direct local churches and Christians to think biblically about political engagement? In part, there's a legal component to it, which is churches need to know what they can and can't do in terms of supporting candidates, hosting debates. There's a lot that churches can do. There's certain legal waters they need to navigate. So part is informing churches to know what to do. But another part is to have Christians think biblically about political engagement. And the title of the conference is intentional, because the common modicum is, when the moniker is, keep politics out of the pulpit. And the point of the conference is to say, not that your sermon should be political speeches, but the nature of being a believer in the world has always been political and has always had political implications. Even in the first century, the claim that Jesus was Lord in light of Caesar's self-proclaimed lordship was a political statement. The Apostle Paul and the other apostles stood before politicians and made the claim not only that they must believe the gospel, but held politicians to account for their lawlessness. John the Baptizer holds Herod to account for his sinfulness. The Apostle Paul holds Agrippa or Festus or Felix, saying it's unlawful for you to treat Roman citizens this way. So they had no problem not only speaking to political leaders, but saying the scriptures determine how you are and are not to engage. And so we wanted this conference to be an opportunity to train Christians. And really, the argument that I think we're going to make is that every Christian, it is incumbent upon them. They're responsible. They're required, I would use a strong word, in some way to engage in the political, cultural environment around them. Now, that doesn't mean that every Christian runs for office. That doesn't mean that every Christian is out doing protests. But every Christian can engage in some way. So high level, we have people running for office. But on the other end, there's no reason why Christians should not be calling and writing their MPs when it's election time. So this last municipal election, I sought a meeting with all of the candidates for mayor to have coffee with them, just ask them questions about policy. What do you think about this? Writing, emailing, helping if you have someone from your church who's running, there's no reason why you shouldn't help them in door knocking, handing out flyers, helping serve as someone to tally votes, even supporting them financially. Every Christian in some way can be engaged in the political life of the church or the political world around them. And I think it's the church's responsibility to think biblically about that. And the conference will aim to do that. So high level, the three speakers will cover 3 sessions. Session 1 will be, what is the biblical role of the state? And what is the church's relationship to the state? What does that look like? And that'll be the local church pastor. I'll be speaking on the Christian's responsibility for political engagement. So I'll be looking at biblical examples of God's people who engage in political office, but also who speak to politicians who are engaged in some sort of protest. And then I'll be unpacking Romans 13, and I think a right way to show that we're responsible to hold the state accountable. And then David Haskell will be speaking on some of the implications legally, some things to be aware of. But he'll then offer some very tangible, practical, you can do this, you can do this, you can do this. And then we'll have a Q&A session to close. And we'll also have vendors, and someone from the CHP, Lord willing, will be at each of our conferences as well, so that people can leave the conference, or as they're walking out or mingling, there are going to be 4 or 5 tables set up where they can, let me check out the CHP. Let me check out Action for Canada. Let me go to the Ezra Institute. Hey, let me check out the Canadian Coalition of Bioethical Reform. If you're Ontario, maybe I'll check out the Ontario Party table. We want to give people tangible opportunities to sign their name somewhere, get their email, and get involved in some way. So it's immensely practical, but it's also going to be very intentional and grounded in biblical principles. That's the goal.
Yeah, tremendous. And you guys were involved significantly in the last round of municipal elections, school trustees, city councils, and so on. And I think, partly it's the call. Many people don't think of themselves as potential candidates or, potential, frontline, trench warriors in these battles. But the battles are getting so intense, and the attacks, the undermining of the family, the undermining of free speech, and the undermining of basically religious freedom is so intense. If we don't rise up together in a good way, a positive way, to offer a biblical worldview in the public square, we will not have the kind of democracy, democratic values, and family values that we have enjoyed as Canadians for decades, and since our foundation as a nation.
And I don't think it's optional, right? I think when we look at Jeremiah before the Israelites are about to go into captivity, in Jeremiah 29, the Lord tells the people through the prophet Jeremiah, you will find yourselves in a foreign land, which I would say applies to us now in Canada. Canada is no longer a Christian nation. It's a post-Christian nation. We are exiles in this land, quite in the literal sense. Like, we are foreigners and aliens now in Babylon. We're in Babylon, and here you have God's people trying to navigate that. And so what is it that the Lord says to his people? Seek the prosperity of the city. Build houses, plant vineyards, like seek the well-being of the city. Don't just say we're here, let it burn. No, actually do seek the well-being of the city. That's required of us, right? If we're to be the salt of the earth and the light of the world, salt in ancient times wasn't primarily used to flavor steaks. It was used as a preservative. To what? To push back against decay, against the breaking down of things. And so if we are salt, clearly our world there's much evil and much decay around us. And so our job is not merely to proclaim the gospel, though that is central to the Christian mission, but it's also to push back against the decay, to uphold what is true, good, and beautiful, and say, we will not allow these people, we will not allow our friends, our fellow citizens, to be overcome with the evil and decay of godless ideologies. We'll push back against them. And so it's more than just this is an option, and this is the case we're going to make at the conference. That we are required to think about how we are to be engaged in the political cultural world in some way, and it's different for everyone. But all of us have a part to play in the same way that all of us have a part to play in the Great Commission or the Dominion Mandate. We have a part to play in doing what the Lord commands us to do in the cities and the provinces and the country around us.
Yeah, so absolutely. And I'm thinking, I always think about the verse, am I my brother's keeper, the Good Samaritan, who is your neighbor? But all around us in our neighborhoods, there are young people, children from infants up through high school and college years who are going into that maelstrom of that swirling, murky event that is like high school, puberty, the adolescent years, finding your way in life. What am I going to be when I grow up? Those types of things, and being forced right now, so many young people at very young ages are being dragged through the muck and the mire of a very ungodly worldview and a very unbiblical view of their own identity. And some people might say, well, I don't have children anymore, or, I don't have kids in the school system anymore. But those children that live in your neighborhood are your neighbors. And their parents may or may not be aware of what's happening in the school and what kind of things are being crammed into their little impressionable minds, and that are going to affect them not only for their high school years, but affect them throughout their lives, unfounded kind of convictions about who they are and what they might become. So we do have a responsibility not only for our own children and grandchildren, but for our neighbors' children and grandchildren as well, to be salt and light and to reflect godly values, kingdom values in our local governance, our provincial governance, and our national governance.
Yeah, no, agreed. That's right. It's that we need to think about how can we care for, right? What we need to do is we need to avoid either ditch. And the two ditches that I think exist when we're thinking about evangelism and the gospel and also social responsibility, the two ditches that exist are, one, the social gospel, which conflates social responsibility with the gospel, which says that we need to be about social justice, we need to be all about equity, and that's one ditch. The other ditch is to say, no, it's only about getting people their get out of hell ticket. right? We don't care about their bodies. We just care about their souls, whatever. Because when Jesus comes back, he's going to burn their bodies. You're going to get new ones. Those are ditches. But I think the right path forward is, and John Stott captures this in his book Christian Mission in the Modern World, which is a phenomenal book, that if we are going to obey the Great Commission, that is evangelism plus social responsibility. Because if I am to love my neighbor is neither a bodiless soul nor a soulless body, but a body soul unity, which means I'm to care for his body and his soul. And the Great Commission isn't it's not just that the implication of the Great Commission is social responsibility, but that social responsibility is baked into the Great Commission, because this is what it means to disciple nations. The Great Commission is clearly an extension of the Dominion Mandate, which is given in the Garden, which is taking a wild, chaotic world and bringing order to it by building, by fashioning, by putting together, and by creating. We're to bring order out of chaos and beauty out of just randomness. So you put all this together, and we're to care for our neighbor's soul and our neighbor's body. I mean, James makes this point very clear in James chapter 2. Your brother comes to you, I'm hungry, I'm naked. Be warm and well fed. I'm praying for your soul. No, like, give the man a sandwich and a jacket. Like, you can't just say, is your soul right with the Lord? Because that's all I care about. No, we're supposed to care for him as a person, as a physical being in the physical world that God has made. So to avoid those two ditches and find that right path, which is body and soul, we are to care for people made in the image of God, because that's what he commands us to do.
Amen. Amen. I did mention earlier Bill 63. I don't want to spend too much time on it. But there's a lot of writing and thinking and talking going on about it. It certainly is terrible, but I'd like to get you to just make some brief comments, and then we'll finish off by telling people how they can find out about these three events across the country and how they can get involved. So, Bill 63,
Yep.
the online harms bill.
Yeah. So one of the things that I'll say is we are in the process, LCC is in the process of fashioning a template email or letter to be sent to your MPs. I would encourage every single person who does not want to live in an outright hard totalitarian tyrannical state to write to your MPs. I want to fearmonger, but the reality is the implications of this bill are disastrous and essentially forward Canada more and more into a 1984 dystopia that we just don't want to go in that direction. So I would encourage everyone to write their MP. And if you're wondering, well, what do I say? If you follow us, if you subscribe to our emails, or if you follow us on social media, then you'll hear soon enough. If you don't, then I would encourage you to subscribe and follow, because we're going to be releasing a template letter to send to MPs. The bill it's pretty egregious. I mean, you have the potential for being placed under house arrest for a year if someone suspects that you may commit a hate crime, which is defined vaguely. And if you have already previously committed a hate crime, that could be up to a 2-year house arrest if someone reports you to the authorities. There's life in prison for actually doing a hate crime. But again, the definitions are vague and left to the interpretation of an activist court and woke legislators. So we can't rely on them for comfort. So you got life in prison, you have house arrest, you have social media platforms could be fined in the tens of millions of dollars if they don't route out all the hate speech. You have the definition of hatred being added to the Human Rights Act, which is problematic. Hatred is being defined as an emotion with strong disdain or detestation. I mean, that's like trying to stick jello to a wall. Like, that's hard to put a handle on.
Yeah.
And then you also have increased penalties for engaging in hate propaganda. And in conjunction with Bill C-367, if you try to say that, well, these are my deeply held Christian beliefs based on the thousand years old biblical text, right? So the scriptures say God's made the man and woman. Well, that's hate speech. Well, that's what the Bible says. Well, sorry, we're going to take those protections away from you, and you could see up to 5 years in prison. So this bill is being couched as caring for kids so that they're not exposed to hateful, over-sexualized material. That's how it's being couched, which, by the way, is why I think the Conservative Party will have a more difficult time opposing it. Because if you oppose it, they'll say, oh, so you want kids unfettered access to all sexual content? You want kids to be bullied? And of course not, but that'll be the play. The play will be a little bit of sneakiness in order to make it difficult to oppose it. But the bill is it's a disaster. It is exactly the sort of thing that would plunge us into an Orwellian Canada, and people need to speak up and out about it, and not fear the consequences. Because and we saw this during COVID, churches remained silent, people remained silent, and that just gave the state all the license they needed to increase lockdowns, to increase surveillance, to fine people for coming into the country without proof of jab mandate. And so the more silent we are, the more we incentivize our state to continue with their heavy-handedness. So we need to speak out.
No, very good. Thank you. And I'm sure that we will be having a lot more discussion about this horrendous act, this bill, in the days ahead, because unless it's turned back, we will be in Orwell's kind of 1984, and could even be worse than that. So, and one of the things that one of the provisions would grant a reward, kind of a bounty for people who turn in a neighbor that they feel could commit a hate crime. The person, the snitch, the person who thinks that they're doing the country a favor by reporting on neighbor an act that may or may not have anything to do with hate, they get a financial reward. I mean, that's certainly going to lead to a lot of trouble. But anyway, let's close off with just making sure people know how to get connected with the Politics in the Pulpit conference. You have 3 dates.
So if you go to so if you go to libertycoalitioncanada.com/politics in the pulpit, that'll take you to our main page. And when you scroll down, you'll see that there are 3 locations. So we will be in Weston, Nova Scotia, which is just north of Halifax, on April the 20th. It's a Saturday. We will be in Ingersoll, Ontario, just outside of London. That will be on May the 4th. And then we will be in New Westminster, BC, which is southeast of Vancouver, on May the 25th. They're all Saturdays. All the conferences run roughly from 9 to 2, 9 to 3. There's slight variation, but it's a morning done by the early afternoon. Registration's $30, except for Western Nova Scotia. That one's free because of some generosity. So $30 is lunch is included. You're at the conference. There's the 3 sessions, the live Q&A. The vendors will be out there. And so you can register for any of the 3 locations. I'm anticipating that we're going to sell out of all 3. Seating is limited, somewhere between 200 and 300 spots per location. So register. If you're unable to attend, we're hoping to record them and release them at a later date, but you're going to want to be there if you can. And I'll also say, for anyone who's listening, if you're thinking, this is great, we've never had anything like this. There's never been a conference in Canada where conservative Christians have been training and encouraging people in terms of how to be engaged politically, how to think about it biblically, and how to do this good cultural engagement work. It's so great. We want to support it. Then by all means, we would love you to help. If you're so convinced of that, you can email me, churches@libertycoalitioncanada.com. If you want to say, hey, I want to support this financially, I want to see these conferences be executed well, and I want to fund this kind of work and this kind of initiative in our country, then you can reach me at that email address, and I can direct you to the appropriate place. So again, it's libertycoalitioncanada.com/politics in the pulpit. And you can email me, churches@libertycoalitioncanada.com.
Excellent. That's great information and very clear, and we'll have those links also in our show notes. Andrew DeBartolo, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for the work that you and the rest of the team at Liberty Coalition Canada are doing. We really appreciate, some concise dialogue that you and Matt Halleck carry on, as well as Michael Thiessen and others. It's great. We're so happy to have you in the trenches and to be in the trenches with you as we face some of the toughest, I guess, political, cultural moments that I think that we've seen in Canada. Well, that in my lifetime for sure, and even going back a long way before that. So thank you so much. God bless you. Carry on with your good work. And I'm planning to be there with my wife at the Ingersoll, Ontario event on May the 4th, and look forward to seeing you there again. So God bless you.
Yeah, Lord willing, I'll see you there. Thanks so much, Rob.
Thanks. Bye-bye.